Before Call of Duty there was Medal of Honor, and Medal of Honor Allied Assault was actually the very first competitive online FPS gameplay experience that I ever had. But alongside the game's fantastic online multiplayer, there was the campaign, an epic action-packed single-player mode depicting the Allied assault on Nazi-occupied Europe following Lieutenant Mike Powell of the United States Army Rangers. World War D Part 1 from developer-publisher Truce follows a similar premise, having you take up arms as one of the many Allied soldiers who risked their lives on that fateful day as you battle on through, attempt to gain a foothold in France, and begin the fight to take back Europe and repel the Nazi forces. The question is though, is it any good and should you be spending your hard-earned cash on it? Well, drop a like, subscribe for more Switch content, and let's find out. Now, the game opens up with an introductory cutscene as we learn about the first class secret mission to storm the beaches of Normandy and begin our assault, and the developers have used what appears to be a combination of real life footage and that taken from either a video game or film. But given the quality of the rest of the game, I'm not entirely sure whether they've created the fictional footage themselves or, dare I suggest, stolen it. The intro is decent enough, setting the scene for us as historic voiceovers narrate against the on-screen text, but this is the only story element we get in the game, and from here on out we're left to muddle through and try and comprehend what is happening for ourselves. Now, much like Allied Assault, the game opens with the historic storming of Omaha Beach, but as you'll soon see, this and the rest of the game are a lackluster effort in comparison to the 2002 classic. But to save you the pain and time that I went through, I'm going to talk you through my experiences of the game rather than just review it, so spoilers are incoming. Now, as our landing craft makes landfall, we're treated to another introductory cutscene as we see Nazi machine gunners peppering the Allied troops with bullets, unfortunate victims of the assault already being wiped out in the opening moments, and a shot of our landing craft as it hits the beach and the landing ramp rolls slowly downwards, revealing the hellish terrain ahead. Then, everyone dies. We then gain control of our character and find ourselves facing in entirely the wrong direction, and this will be something repeated in future levels. Now, our progression across the beach is mostly uneventful. We take a ton of damage from the machine guns but can heal ourselves after reaching medics, and there's very little to do here but push forward until we encounter our squad commander. You'll notice, however, that there is some very heavy filtering going on with the visuals, and I went ahead and restarted this mission, turning off the ambient occlusion, which can only be done from the main menu, and which didn't really help at all. Leisurely strolling back through the carnage though, we once more meet up with the squad commander, who directs us to retrieve a nearby explosive box to clear an iron fence, and this is another objective taken straight from Allied Assault, where you use Bangalore torpedoes to blow up the barrier, but rather than carefully pushing them over the sand mound, the engineer launches the thing like a fucking javelin, successfully clearing the way though. Dashing over the mound into the trenches, we then get our first real taste of combat, but this is abruptly ended as you kill 2 soldiers and the first level ends. Now, Mission 2 sees us fighting through the trenches armed with an M1 Garand, and to start with the combat isn't all that bad. We can aim down sights and fire off shots with the trigger buttons, and the rifle sounds pretty punchy. However, you'll soon begin to notice that there are some real issues with this one. Movement is fine for the most part, but the strafing feels incredibly off, almost like you're sliding from side to side whenever you try to walk forwards, and you're able to sprint and jump, but both of these actions drain an invisible stamina meter. Rather than being pre-placed into levels though, the game's enemies spawn when you hit certain trigger points, appearing on your radar as red dots, and the AI of these enemies is rather poor to say the least, with them rarely engaging with you unless you shoot them or are directly in front of them. But the radar itself is also next to useless as it doesn't rotate with your orientation, so pinpointing the enemies can be a bit of a nightmare. Fighting through these trenches though, we can acquire secondary weapons in the form of submachine guns, and there are 3 in the game, those being the German MP40, the American Thompson, and for some unknown reason, the Russian PPSH. You will however discover that you don't actually have to aim at enemies with these, and your bullets kind of lock onto them, sort of like the classic Doom games, and all of them provide lackluster firepower, so you'll be going through clips of ammo for fun with these weapons. Scattered throughout each level, you will find health and ammo crates, and enemies drop additional crates or weapons which can be swapped out, but the scarcity of these resources become a real issue in the latter part of the game. And finally, we also have grenades, which are about as much use as tits on a goldfish, as they do very little damage, and enemies will usually be left standing after the explosions. Now, there's very little else to be said about this second level. It's pretty much just a maze of trenches followed by a final assault on a bunker. Moving on to level 3 though, we once again begin the level with our backs to the action, which just so turns out to be a hail of machine gun fire that instantly begins stripping our health meter. And you'll notice that I turned off the film grain effect at this point, which I definitely recommend doing right away. This third mission is a right ball ache though, as we're first tasked with taking out the machine gun nests using a bazooka. However, doing so proves to be incredibly frustrating, as attempting to get in close results in you taking far too much damage, and the cover in the game is also pretty busted, with you frequently shooting invisible barriers. And simply aiming the damn thing is a nightmare too, as the reticle blocks your vision and doesn't even line up with where it's firing, so your best bet is to just shoot from the hip at a distance like I did. Once you've knocked out the guns though, you can then proceed up the hill and take out the remaining soldiers, and you'll start to notice that visual glitches are also an extremely common occurrence in this one, such as this lovely grey wall blocking the way which you can just walk right through, and rather than blood splatters, when you take hits, your screen will be filled with bullet holes which block your vision and take several seconds to disappear. Anyway, the rest of the level is full of tight trenches which are an absolute nightmare to walk through, and a final battle to breach the bunker. Now, for some reason, the next level begins with you in a jail cell, and as you exit the cell, a bunch of Nazis storm you from the adjoining cells, a totally baffling event with no rhyme or reason. But the level itself is a long old slog through corridors and cell blocks, and I've no idea who actually designed this level, but it's an absolute mess with the corridors haphazardly pieced together and completely busted lighting effects throughout. Once you reach the final room though, you're loaded into the next level and have to proceed through a nearby hatch, descending into what can only be described as a palletized stairway to hell. And you're supposed to work your way down this, fighting enemies, but I managed to find a gap in the invisible barriers and took the express route. Once at the bottom, destroy some equipment, kill a couple of enemies and exit to a nearby room identical to the one that you started in. Now, the next two levels are pretty much more of the same as you battle your way through poorly constructed tunnels, with the objective being to destroy the machine gun nests firing down on Omaha Beach, and you'll really begin to notice how poorly the AI has been programmed in these ones, as they fight to get through doorways and rush around corners in single file groups at you. You'll also discover how shite the shotgun is in this game, or more accurately, the reloading, because once you start reloading you can't actually stop or change weapons, and if you're using the shotgun you have to wait for all 8 shells to be reloaded, which ain't ideal when you're surrounded by enemies. After taking down the first machine gun nest though, the next mission then wanted me to head back through the same sets of tunnels to the second, but I figured I'd try and cheese it and take down the nest by launching a few missiles across the way at it. Turns out the game was having none of it, and after attempting it several times, I made my way through the tunnels only to discover that I had indeed taken out the turrets, but that they were now bugged, and so I had to replay the whole level all over again. Mission 9 loaded in, and this is where you can really start to notice how little effort has gone into the visuals and optimising the performance with this one. At the start of the level, you'll notice Omaha Beach has become an untextured mess, and once you get outside, the frame rate issues which have been plaguing the game from the get-go are beyond bearable. It's nearly impossible to actually hit anything unless it's stationary, and your so-called allies are next to useless. Now, I did attempt to sequence break this area by hopping onto the barriers to skip part of the level, but just like the bunker, the game was having none of it as I didn't hit the spawn triggers, and I actually thought that the game was broken at this point, as after working my way through the level normally, the objectives were still not spawning in. Turns out I actually had to head into this bunker which wasn't marked on the radar to spawn in the first objective, which then allowed me to complete the rest. Now the next level once again had me battling through frame rate hell and had me destroying some anti-aircraft guns using dynamite. Pretty uneventful stuff, and by this point I was kind of coming to the end of my tether with the near unplayability of it all, so in the next level I decided to try and sprint my way to the end. But it turned out to be almost as difficult as just fighting your way through the enemies, and that just triggering the checkpoints wasn't enough to clear the level, so I ended up having to kill a few Nazis before the game would let me continue. Level 12 though was the final straw, and the objective was to apparently move to my destination, rescue the villagers and join my allies. However, right away you're faced with an impossible task as a machine gun bunker blasts the fuck out of you, ripping through your health bar, and the frame rate absolutely shits its pants again. You're able to skirt the border of this level to avoid the machine gun tower, but once you get into the town area, you're looking at about 3 frames per second, and once again, you can't just run through the level. So this is where my story ended with this one. Now, I think I've said and shown you everything there is to know about this one, apart from the additional air defense mode which requires you to clear all of the game's missions. And when all said and done, it's not the worst World War II FPS game that I've played on the Switch. That award goes to Polygon Arts' United Assault Normandy 44. However, World War D-Day has far too many issues to make it a fun game to play. From its poorly constructed levels and the lack of any real direction when it comes to objectives, to the pop-up enemy spawns, buggy AI and god-awful frame rates which make it nigh on impossible to shoot anything. The game just feels unfinished and hastily thrown together, with very little effort put into optimising it or ensuring that everything works as it should. It's a shame really, as Medal of Honor Allied Assault was a great game for the time, and it really wouldn't have taken much to replicate its simple gameplay formula and apply it with this game. They had a lot of the groundwork already covered, and it would have made for a nice kind of throwback to the classic shooter. But as is the case with many of these games, from small independent studios that'd rather throw it together in a couple of weeks, get it out onto the eShop, and move on to the next venture to repeat the process all over again. That though, ladies and gentlemen, is World War D from Trues, and the previously released 2 other entries in the series which I've yet to play, but I suspect they offer very much the same experience. If you've played any of these games though, do comment down below with your thoughts and opinions on them, and if you picked up World War D, let me know how you found it. For now though, drop a like if this one helped you out, subscribe for more Nintendo Switch reviews and content, and until next time, take care of yourselves and game on.